Welcome to the Critter Creator, folks. I'm gonna make this little video for the Critter Creator page because I don't want it to fall behind. I'm very involved in a big project right now for my gaming page, and it actually has to do with some underwater rules that will allow us to play with miniatures underwater. And so I'm designing this big coral reef table and everything else so Julie and I can play and film the games. Um, so that's on a separate page. That really has nothing to do with what I do here in the Critter Creator. However, as I'm doing all this, I realize that a lot of the techniques that I'm using for this gaming table are the same techniques that I would use when, say, adorning one of my sculptures, right? I like to adorn the bases of my sculptures with all this little extra stuff, right? Like the kelp, which needs a little bit of a touch-up of paint. This is an older sculpture. You know, I like to do the waves, and I do the barnacles and everything out of clay. You know, I just like to adorn the scenery that the sculpture is on. It really gives the sculpture a lot more interest, a lot more value. So I'm going to show you guys all the little things that I'm doing for this big coral reef that I'm making. And then we'll go take a look at the coral reef. Now, like I said, all the little things that I'm doing here are for a game. These little things can be for a diorama, maybe an underwater diorama, give adults an idea, maybe for a diorama for their kids or whatever. Just be sure all the techniques that I use utilize like heat guns or cutting tools, and so make sure it's the adult that's working with that and not kids. These techniques are generally not for kids because I'm using a lot of sharp tools and such. So, but anyway, here is one example. And here, what I did, this is not painted yet. I'm going to paint the little snail. And I bought a pack of seashells from the dollar store. And I just sculpted the snail around the seashell. And what that does is, the only reason why I did this is because it saves a lot of clay. You know, I can do this seashell in clay, no problem, but it just saves a lot of clay, and it was very quick to do. And then I took the details of the snail, like the little proboscis right here and everything else, and all of that is done with resin clay. Okay, so now all I have to do is paint it, and then I have a snail that I use in my scenery. The octopus as well, very simple. I didn't really, the only thing that I do is I try to keep the correct anatomy, but I'm not really doing like a super ultra realistic octopus. I just want something that really resembles an octopus, right? There's the little siphon. That's something I always add, and then I just puncture the clay to give it some texturing and everything else. And so there's an octopus. I also made a little stingray, and this is done with tin foil. I first start with tin foil, and then I sculpture over the tin foil. And then the tail is a piece of wire that I use. And so this is nice and sturdy, and this is all baking clay. Okay, super sculpey baking clay. It's the cheapest to use. And again, I'm not making it ultra realistic. I just want to have the proper shapes, and everything, because this is going to go glued to one of my terrain pieces, as you will see in a moment. And then sponges, very easy, nothing to it, right? These are little things you can do on the side to decorate bases. Now, again, with the seashells, I wanted to depict some giant clams. And so with this seashell pack that I bought at the dollar store, it had a lot of seashells, and I just found quite a few that matched. And so they were right and left halves. And I just glue them together, and voila, I have a giant clam, and I can stick it into my rock, and there it is. Now, if I were going to make this even more realistic for, say, some sculpture of some sea creature, right? And I just want to have this on the base. Then I would take a little bit of resin clay and just sculpture the sort of undulating edges of the giant clam, and that would make it look more realistic. And then I could paint it, and voila, saves me clay. Little sea stars, easy enough. These will be embedded in various places. And then I have these sea urchins, and I just made these sea urchins. Now in the game, they're going to play a different role. But on a base, say if you had the sculpture of, I don't know, a giant crab or something, whatever, sea creature, and you want to decorate the base, there's an easy way to make sea urchins. And here is basically the way I start my sea urchins. A little glob of clay. And then I take my floral wire, because I use floral wire for a lot of different things. And I cut myself a length of floral wire. And I'm just going to do this quick just to kind of show what I do, but I'm not going to like actually do it so that the video doesn't take too long, right? But basically what I'm doing is I bend my wire, right? And whenever I have to cut a lot of pieces of wire, I do this, and it just saves me a lot of time rather than cutting, you know, 1,000,001 individual pieces. And then I take my cutter, and I'm going to try to focus with the camera. You see where the loops are? All right, I'm going to try to focus a little bit. There we go. Okay, where the loops are, and very carefully cut them off, okay? And then do the same on the other side, and I have myself a bunch of little wire lengths. And I'm using a wire cutter. There you go, okay? And so now I have a bunch of little wire lengths, okay? And then what I do, very simply, I just puncture my little clay ball with all these little wires. And I usually go, and this one needs to be cut again, usually go right through the clay, right to the other side, right, with a few of them. So I just impaled a little clay ball, and I keep doing this until I have this situation right here. Here's one of the urchins ready to bake, actually. And so that's my next step. Once I have my little urchin, right, and once I have my little urchin, I put it on a piece of tin foil, like this. I just make this little square, and then cover it with another piece of tin foil. Okay, so I have this situation going on. I'm going to move this aside so I can show it. So I have this situation. I put a little weight on it. And then I take my heat gun. Yeah, I'm going to... and blow hot air in there. And it gets really hot and just bakes the clay. This way I don't have to leave the studio constantly. I could just fill that up with little pieces of clay, you know, little things that I'm making, and then heat it up. And it doesn't take very long. Now, you can also do this with a blow dryer. A blow dryer on high. It'll heat up that foil, and, you know, the air in there will heat up quite nicely. And you have to let it cool because that tin foil gets hot. And then it'll cook whatever clay you have in there. You know, as long as it's small pieces of clay. And then, of course, I spray paint it. I give it a little spurts of brown spray paint. In this case, I did some red as well, and I have a little sea urchin. Okay, and I use this to adorn bases, you know, just give the coral reef that illusion that, yeah, you know, it's full of life, full of critters. Okay, so that's my little sea urchin trick. And it really doesn't take very long to make. Now, I have to make quite a few for this piece that I'm making for the game. And again, they play a slightly different role in the game than they would in, in as a decorative piece in a sculpture. All right, so next, this one's a little more complicated, and this is obviously a giant jellyfish, and this would go well, say, in a sculpture of a sea turtle. I was going to, I've been planning that for a while. I haven't really been able to make it yet, but this would go well, an encounter between a large jellyfish and a sea turtle. And of course, sea turtles, many species, eat jellyfish, and they're immune to the tentacles, to the poisons, and everything else. So I'm using this piece for a very different reason, but this would make a very cool deep sea kind of diorama, to learn about these creatures. And this was done with wires, floral wires, and I have a whole technique to hold the main framework of the jellyfish is these sort of twisty structures here, right? And that's sort of the stand. That's what holds everything up. And then I sculpture a little bell, and I make sure it's irregular, and I give it some detail. And there's detail even underneath this critter. And then I have some wire that comes out of the bell and wires that come out of this sort of, these thicker tentacles. So the result is you have this, menagerie of like wires kind of interconnecting and everything. And it really does look like the floating tentacles of a jellyfish. At least to me it does. Now this has to be painted, of course, and everything else, but there is a giant jellyfish, and that would be a cool part of a sculpture. The other thing I'm doing with this deep sea stuff, to make tube worms, and we're gonna go see the reef in just a minute, but you could sculpture these. You could sculpture tube worms, but again, if I want to save a little clay and I want to have some tube worms on my base, I cut the handles off of paper bags, and they look exactly like tube worms. To me, they do anyway. Tube worms usually make these sort of almost papery like cases, just like this, and they're even this color in many cases. And then the worm lives inside. Now, to make the little feathery tentacles that adorn the mouth of the worm, right? These feathery tentacles come in and out, depending on the currents. And I'm using this. I bought at Walmart. It was like $2, and I'm actually using the tips of these underwater plants, and they make very good little feather dusters, right? So the little tube worms. Now, if I don't have these, the other thing I was doing is cutting lengths of rope, making sure I use a comb to separate all the filaments, and then I color that rope, and that makes excellent little feather duster worms as well. Okay, so either way. So these look very nice when you kind of cluster them together, different sizes, and you have them coming out of rocks, from in between rocks. It really gives the reef that you're creating a very nice effect. The other thing I do is pipe cleaners. These I could get in any craft store, Walmart. They sell them big packs, and they come in all these colors. They make excellent tube sponges, and all I do is I just cut them, right? I cut them different lengths, and I stick them in between my rocks, and because they're so fuzzy and so colorful, they make excellent tube sponges. And again, they save a lot of time and sculpting, Okay, so again, this is more for a game. It's not for a sculpture, but all the techniques that I'm using here, they can be used in sculptures as well. So there's my little clay octopus. I have some tinfoil rocks, tinfoil corals, because I do make corals out of tinfoil. And there go the little feather duster worms, right? They're kind of growing out of there. You can see my divers there. I sculpted one. This is a handmade sculpture. But You can see all the corals, the pipe cleaners, the algae, the little tube worms, you know, all that stuff. And in the background there, you even see little fish kind of hovering around the sponge there. And there will be more little fish kind of coming in and out of these coral heads. Now, to decorate, because this is such a big structure, this is cloth. And I texture paint my cloth, right? This might be a good diorama tip. I don't know. But I have like books and other things because these are modular tables. I take them apart once we're finished. But you could see how it creates all like the little folds, just like rock. And then I decorate it to form the actual reef with all these modular parts. Well, for the hanging corals, we have this stuff that we want to, it's a lot of empty space. So what I do is I take a hanger clothespin, right? And you can see the clothespin there. And I fill it, I decorate it with all kinds of little corals, little worms, little critters that you saw me sculpting there. And then I have a nice little coral head, and it can clip right to these folds of cloth, and I can hang them so that it could decorate the cliff of the coral and provide that illusion, right? That illusion that there's just coral growing all the way down. And then the bottom is, of course, the greater depths, and I have some of my sculptures here, and that I keep more bare because that's the greater depth, you know, the base of the reef. So this really doesn't have a lot to do with the critter creator, but you know, these are all techniques that if you're working on a diorama or you want to make something cool like that, you know, like a diorama, or decorate the base of a sculpture, these are all techniques that are perfectly valid. Okay, and you can see my giant clams there. I have to paint them, but they're embedded in the tinfoil rock. So, all right. Thank you, folks. I just wanted to do this little video for the critter creator. And now back to creating the coral reef.